Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Atomi Brainwaves, our podcast on education for educators. Brainwaves is produced by our wonderful team here at Atomi. What is Atomi? It's an online teaching and learning platform for secondary education. We provide engaging, curriculum-specific video and text lessons for over 190 subjects, as well as matching quizzes and exam practice that can be used for both learning and formative assessment. We also provide powerful analytics that can help teachers diagnose how their students are progressing and zero in on who might need a little bit of extra help. Our goal is to help make life easier for our teachers, give them more time to work on the most important things, and ultimately help to generate better outcomes. If you want to find out more about Atomi, head over to our main site at getatomy.com and feel free to try it out for free. This week, I had the pleasure of speaking with Steve Isaacs, EdTech influencer and leader in game-based learning. We unpacked just what game-based learning is, how it can be used in concert with and in contrast to traditional forms of education, and the importance of resources to game-based learning. If this sounds good to you, feel free to subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to do your podcast listening, and we'll never say no to a quick 5-star review. In the meantime, give this episode a listen, and I hope you enjoy.
Are you going to teach us anything?
What, you want me to teach you something? You want to learn something? All right. You got it!
Hey everyone, welcome back to Atomi Brainwaves. It's me, your host Simon, joined today by our very special guest Steve Isaacs, award-winning teacher of 30 years, EdTech influencer, community builder, and leader in game-based learning. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks. Nice to see you, Simon.
Yes, nice to have you on with, as I was commenting on before we started recording, a very impressive mic.
Thank you.
It's certainly a lot better than mine. So if listeners, if Steve's audio quality is vastly superior to mine, then that will probably be the reason why. Well, as was probably heard in the intro there, a major area for you would be that of game-based learning. Kind of a real area of expertise for you and something that we're going to be focusing most of our attention on throughout the chat. However, we always like to start with our guests by just getting a quick history of your journey in education. You know, where you started out as a teacher, or even before that, if there was anything that particularly led to you becoming a teacher, and what was it along the way that led to the particular place that you find yourself in now?
Yeah, so it's actually a great question because during college, I was a psychology major. I thought I wanted to be a psychologist. And as a part-time, which became full-time job during college, I was working in a group home with adults with developmental disabilities. And as I was working there and, talking to people, and I really enjoyed the work, somebody had suggested maybe I should get certified as a teacher, for special education. And their idea was primarily to do that so that I would have the option to teach, because technically with a psychology degree, it really is just a license to go for further schooling. Whereas with the teaching certificate, I could go out and get a job. So it sounded reasonable to me. So I looked into the education school, wasn't sure that I was really going into it to be a teacher or to have that be my career. But I did, in fact, graduate and started pursuing jobs in special education and started my teaching career teaching students with developmental disabilities in a self-contained class in a school in Montclair, New Jersey. And interestingly, the school happened to be a science and technology magnet school. And I always tell the part of the story that my students were not there because it was a science and technology magnet school, although most kids that went there went because that's what they wanted. My students were there because it was the building with a room that could house my self-contained class. The positive side was that I quickly realized some of the great resources we had. And again, like you said, this is about 30 years ago. And I was able to quickly learn that the opportunities for using technology and games with my students opened up a whole world of, in terms of individualized instruction. And it was really neat because it's tough when you teach special education, especially, like the kids I was teaching, the span of ability levels was very broad. So a lot of times it meant creating different lessons for almost every kid in the class. And when I found certain, tools or games, like some of the math games and things that we found, it became clear that because they followed a scope and sequence and kids could learn at their own pace, it actually really created, that space where kids could be working on what was appropriate for them, and I could support them in a little bit of a different way. So I had no idea that was going to be the way that went. And I always happen to be just a fan of technology and games and things. So, once I kind of realized that, it made sense. And while I was there, I became friendly with our technology director, a gentleman named Paul Tarentiles. And Paul and I, had lunch together every day and started talking about creative uses of technology. And he ran summer camps in the school district that he was in prior. So he had this customer base and was looking to open up a business to continue what he had started and actually offer summer camps, after school programs, and all sorts of, programs in this facility that would give kids opportunities to use technology in creative ways. So my wife and I ended up joining forces with he and his wife, and we opened up this facility, this store called Liberty Corner Computing. Right. And again, the idea there was we did summer camps, we did after school programs. We, in the evenings, we were open as an internet cafe for a while because that was kind of trendy at the time.
Back in the internet cafe days. Yes. Yeah. A fun time.
The only problem was I loved the idea. So I loved the idea of surfing the internet and drinking coffee. But what we found was in this small town where we were, every Friday and Saturday night, my wife and I sat and sipped coffee and surfed the internet, often by ourselves. And occasionally a customer would come in. And then something pretty magical happened. We started providing the idea where kids that might have missed one of their after-school classes were able to come in the evening and make up their time. And quickly, that became more of a LAN gaming environment than anything else. So all of a sudden, like one night we're sitting there and, most of these nights it was like one or two kids would come in. And then all of a sudden, one night, one car came, dropped off a load of kids. Another car came, dropped off a load of kids. Another car came. And before we know it, for the first time, we were completely full.
The floodgates had opened.
The floodgates had opened. And we had seen something remarkable happen. I mean, this created this space for these kids that just wanted somewhere to hang out, loved playing games, otherwise were maybe playing at home alone. The internet wasn't, most people didn't have fast internet at the time either, so a LAN environment to play games, multiplayer, was kind of novel at the time. And that just opened up a world to me of what was possible. And then in our summer camps and things, we started offering interesting programming around game-based learning, game design, website design, and all sorts of interesting things, which led to me getting the position that I'm in right now, which is I teach technology courses at William Annan Middle School and now also Basking Ridge High School in Basking Ridge, which is the town where our business was. And quickly while I was there, I was teaching programming. So kids were, it made sense to have kids create games as their projects. And then we had an after-school game design club, and that led to me eventually asking to start a game design and development elective, which has grown into a pretty big program now. We have 3 sections of game design and development at the middle school and 2 at the high school. So I've been able to grow that program, and that essentially is all I teach now is game design and development, and it's been absolutely phenomenal. So, that's kind of the path that I took, and couldn't be happier.
Yeah, amazing. It's a really interesting and fascinating journey, and something that kind of jumps out to me there, just to follow up on, is, from my experience with having other guests on the podcast who themselves are also kind of innovators in or innovators in education rather, be that in a technological sense or otherwise, one feature that seems common is a sort of, I guess, an unorthodox path or an unorthodox start. And in your case, I think of what you're saying in terms of, psychology was what you started out with. It wasn't necessarily always geared towards education. Then there was, your experiences working in special education initially, and then everything you're describing there with that fantastic sounding multi-purpose facility. Yeah. And I guess where I'm arriving at is, to what extent would you say, these differences of experience from the get-go and experiencing these different educational environments or almost outside of educational environments and how they inform, to what extent would you say they've informed the, I guess, innovative approach you've taken to teaching over the years?
So, yeah, that's a terrific question, because
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. What I definitely find is that when we had our business, it was a different. So in school, a lot of times there's a traditional approach, there's traditional curriculum. When we had the business, it was about giving our customers what they wanted, right? Which it's kind of funny, because in school, our students are our customers, aren't they? But we don't often see it that way. But when it was a private business, in order to bring people in the door and to pay the bills, we had to offer programming that was exciting for the people who were involved. And what we also found was, of course, we also wanted to appeal to the parents. So we did that in interesting ways. So when we started offering some of our game-based learning-oriented camps, I'll give you an example. We offered a camp that focused on the game Age of Empires, which is now a pretty old but still wonderful game.
My brothers loved. I unfortunately never got into it myself, but they were enormous fans of that game.
Awesome. So the cool thing about Age of Empires is, like, I'm a big fan of real-time strategy games, and the game plays like an exciting real-time strategy game, but it focuses on different civilizations. So the different civilizations have different weapons and things. So and strategies, essentially. So what we did was we created a camp that focused on learning about these civilizations and doing a bit of research about them, with the end goal being to use the information the kids researched to inform their strategy in the game. Now, it was kind of one of these head fakes, right? Because the parents loved the idea that we were having the kids do research and coming up with a presentation and whatnot. The kids loved that they were playing out this camp as their civilization and playing the game. So, parents were happy to have their kids involved. Kids were excited to be there. And that was sort of the secret sauce of a lot of our programs. And luckily parents wanted their kids to have opportunities around using technology in creative ways and productive ways. And so when we offered things like game design, which involved, some programming concepts and things like that, that was appealing. And again, the kids were loving that they were creating their own games. So that idea carried with me. And in fact, even into my interview, I think one of the things that my principal who was interviewing me was excited about was that we had these innovative ideas and could bring some innovative programming to the school. So it completely, translated to what I would later do. And even also then me kind of realizing what was working in that environment and, kind of taking this approach of having like the after school program for game design and getting really excited about seeing what kids were doing and being able to show that kids were engaged in an after school program that was still essentially academic, but yet, really fun and engaging. It all helped to get where I am. And really, in a sense, I feel like I had this, I had this wonderful opportunity to kind of create my dream job in a sense, but it came out of, nothing happens overnight, right? So, I've been teaching at my current school 22 years, and I would say it took me 10 years to get to the point where I was able to completely create this game design program, which, and even to think that it's been running for about 10, 12 years, that was not much of that was happening in schools at that time. So I give my administrators also a ton of credit for trusting and seeing that there was great potential for students in these areas.
Yeah, amazing. It sounds like a really fascinating initiative. Excited to hear more about it as we go along. And I guess our entry point into it, I suppose, is going to be maybe starting, before getting into the nuts and bolts of what's involved, just starting with a bit of theory behind, I guess. So, first off, as a jumping off point, could we get a definition of what game-based learning is? Because I'm sure there's some misconceptions. I'm sure there are some teachers who will hear the word game and automatically it's starting to worry about losing controls of classrooms and no learning being done whatsoever. But let's set the record straight. What exactly is game-based learning?
So for starters, I'll say that there is a huge distinction between game-based learning and gamification. And for years, people have been interchanging those two words somewhat incorrectly. A while ago, I wrote an article actually just highlighting the differences, so I could share that with you for your show notes or what have you.
Yes, please do.
But at the heart of it, game-based learning is the idea of using games to sort of drive the learning process or to enhance the learning. So the learning essentially comes from the gameplay in a true game-based learning scenario. So great example, and Kurt Squire did a lot of work with the game Civilization. And similar to what I talked about before with Age of Empires, Civilization is a game, that deals with different civilizations and history. So it's a great way to teach, sort of historical, ideas, but also from an experiential standpoint. So the kids are learning by being immersed in the environment. That's kind of what I see it as. In my growing up, it took me a while to remember all of the experiences we had, but I realized later that they really shaped my ideas. In I think it was my economics class in middle school, we played the great stock market game. And every kid was given, I think it was $100,000 to invest in the stock market. And we, with newspapers back in the day, checked our stock quotes and updated our portfolios and had certain times where we could do trades and all this. And it was one of the most wonderful experiences I had as a student. And I learned about the stock market. I learned about investing, all of those things through that experience. We could have read a chapter in the textbook and I would have gotten some of it, but I don't think I would have gotten the real feel for it like we did in this case by playing a game. The same teacher, and it's just so funny because, I don't think I thought of him as being, necessarily innovative back then, but I really value what I got from him. Mr. Dennison is actually his name. I wonder what he's up to these days. But he also, in my social studies class, which he taught, we did like a world peace type game, similar probably to, I think it's actually called the World Peace Game, maybe by John Hunter, but it was different but similar, where there was a lot of negotiation and vying for land and for, things like that. But it really put us into that experience. And that was something where I don't know if he developed it himself or whatnot, but these were examples of us playing a game and the learning came from that, and it was very meaningful and very deep. So that's kind of what, where it goes. There are some other amazing people, like I'll mention Paul Darvasi, who has created a number of ARGs or alternate reality games where he has put in so much effort into creating the game world for his students. One of his examples was called the Ward Game, where he wanted to teach his high school seniors in their last term One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And, this was that point in the year where they were kind of checked out. I mean, it's a wonderful book, but I think at that point in the year, it was a challenge to teach. Yes. In fact, I don't know if you've seen the Ratched. Ratched is a new series.
Yes,
that goes back to,
I saw that.
Intense.
Terrifying character.
Yes, quite a show. Oh my gosh, can't wait for season 2. But so he taught that completely through a game where the kids were completely immersed in this game, and it was like they would get text messages, they would get emails, they would see things around campus, they would there were teachers that he got involved in playing a role in this. And the funny thing was, it turned out that he would use the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest novel became like the manual for the game. So you needed to refer to it and to get into it to a point, but it was really because the kids were so involved in this game. And, when you hear his results of the kids that were completely checked out that then woke up and got involved, it's amazing. So games are very powerful. Games, engage us in a meaningful way, and all of that kind of stuff. So, and now I have to take a shift too, because back in the games I'm talking about, it was all about the experience and learning from the game. Game-based learning has taken a huge turn when it comes to like the sandbox games like Minecraft and Fortnite creative mode and other content creation tools, because now kids are creating their own experiences and worlds inside of a game, and you almost start to not be certain whether it's anymore a game or a learning tool or a creation tool. Wow. So like Minecraft, while you can play it as a game, you can also create something, and same with Fortnite creative, where you end up creating the world that you want others to learn in and from. So it gave a lot of leverage to teachers to teach any content area by creating experiences that meet their learning outcomes but allow kids to be creating the content. So it totally turned, because again, now it's not about me playing Minecraft and I'm not learning about managing resources by chopping trees in Minecraft, but rather I'm teaching my class about ancient Egypt by creating the pyramids and narrating a walkthrough experience or something. So that's been, I think, a game changer, no pun intended, in terms of game-based learning, because we've now taken games and found a whole new way to use them. So to your first question about the teachers being afraid of the losing control of their students, I think as teachers, if we guide our students through meaningful activities that use games, then that won't be an issue. If we think we're going to kind of say, okay, here's Minecraft, do some, whatever, then yes, they're going to be distracted and engaged, but not engaged in the learning. So I think that's where our role of teachers, no matter what the activity is, if I give the kids a boring worksheet, I'm also going to have issues keeping them interested or on task, right? So that's a big part. And I started earlier talking about the difference between game-based learning and gamification, and I just want to come back to that for a minute, because gamification, on the other hand, is when we take an otherwise non-game environment and add game mechanics to try to make it a game, or make it feel like, or make it game-like. So I actually use both. I use gamification because I think it's interesting to create a game environment out of school, but I think we need to be careful to do it in a way that's kind of meaningful. So, gamification might be things like I use Classcraft, which allows me to create a quest-based learning environment. So I'm incorporating things like choice-based learning, student voice, giving the kids, opportunities to choose their learning path, as well as adding fun factors like experience points, hit points, and all of that to create a game experience. But it's very different from game-based learning. And if you dilute it quite a bit, gamification can look like my Starbucks rewards card, where I buy coffee and I get stars and eventually I could cash them in for something. I like that. I'm motivated sometimes to that. I might go to Starbucks instead of somewhere else because I have a rewards card. But it's not like a completely immersive, engaging experience, but it has some game elements to it.
Yeah. And a really key distinction, I suppose, to draw there between the two. And some of what you said, I feel, has already answered to a certain degree what I'm going to ask you next. But if possible, I'm going to try just to shine a little light, a little stronger on the contrast between, I guess, game-based learning and more traditional forms of education. And not just the contrast. I suppose what I'm asking is, to what extent can game-based learning be used in concert with traditional forms of education? What we might think of as the classroom, as working off textbooks, and the teacher as the holder of knowledge, and professing that, and people doing questions, blah 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 blah. To what extent does game-based learning work in concert with that? And also, to what extent can it be used almost instead of traditional forms of education in certain points?
So that's interesting. So in concert with, again, if there are times when I can teach the same content that might be in the textbook, but teach it through a game, I think we have an opportunity to engage kids, more interesting. They would be more interested than when we're saying, read this chapter and answer these questions, right? So perhaps we play the game and then discuss the same kinds of things that we are trying to get at in the textbook. So we focus the kids on what learning we're hoping that they're getting out of it. In other words, if we guide the questions, we might get to the same place we would with the textbook, but again, in a more experiential way. So that's one example. And then when we do take things like Minecraft and we say, so here's a great example, actually. So, I always bring up my wife when I talk about this. So she was a technology integration specialist in a school for many years. And the school where she was at, I think one of their maybe third or fifth grade projects was to create a brochure about a national park. So it became this project where the kids essentially got a template in Microsoft Publisher, got some leading questions, did a little bit of research, and everyone created a brochure that followed the same template. So we were able to put 30 or 50 or 100 brochures out in the hallway to display the student work. Well, that might be easy for a teacher to grade and whatnot, but at the same time, what if we give kids different choices for how they meet these learning outcomes? So, what if we take Minecraft and say to kids that are interested, we want you to recreate, a part of Yosemite National Park in Minecraft. And we want you to, create the park ranger and have the ranger take you on a tour and explain the different aspects of the park, or whatever the things were that, so it could be the same learning outcomes that we're getting out of the brochure. We want the kids to research. We want them to share with us what they've learned. And then another thing that we benefit there is, what I love to do is have different kids do different, let's say they're all doing different parks. All of a sudden now we have this idea where we might have 20 different national parks that the rest of the class can explore in Minecraft, which I think the kids would enjoy a little more than reading their classmates' brochures, So there are a lot of things like that I think, and I don't think it's a big stretch, and I don't think teachers have to know Minecraft to do that, which is why I've had a lot of teachers come to me and say, we're doing this project on ancient Egypt. My student came up to me and said he took your class and would like to create his project in Minecraft. Does that sound reasonable? Is there anything I should know? And I'd be able to say, what? I think that's a wonderful idea. I think it's great that you're willing to let them do that and hold them to the same standards and the same rubric. So if the kids are supposed to tell these things, so let them tell it in an environment that they're comfortable with. It also allows kids to leverage their expertise. I love when student expertise comes into the equation, and you have a lot of kids who are really great with these tools and are willing to go way above and beyond. and may have otherwise had a not so successful experience in school, and now all of a sudden they do something really impressive that they can get some acknowledgement from. I think that's great. I have one kid right now who's doing some amazing things in Minecraft, and we even had I got an email recently that he's struggling in all these classes. It seems like this is a class that's of interest to him. Can we look at ways we can, really encourage him, that kind of thing. And I think that's awesome. And I think that's something that also brings in sort of that social emotional learning piece where, if we allow kids to be empowered and excited about what they're doing, they can feel good about themselves.
Hey folks, hope you're enjoying the episode so far, and we've got plenty more to come after this quick break. Here at Atomi Brainwaves, we're all about education, and not just for students, for ourselves too. We would love to hear from you, whether that's feedback on one of our episodes or a question you'd like to see answered by one of our guests or by Sue. So, if you've got a comment or a question, don't hesitate to email us at brainwaves@getatomy.com. Looking forward to hearing from you. In the meantime, let's get back to it. Yeah, really interesting example there amongst a host of interesting examples that we've already got so far, but I'm going to ask you to maybe give us some more, because the next area I want to kind of dive deep into is game-based learning in action, what it looks like in the classroom, the different manifestations, the different strategies. So with the help, if you want, of some of your own experience, or if you prefer generalizations or outlines, some of the strategies, obviously they'll vary as well depending on class size and subject and student age and all the rest, but I guess just some of the tried and true game-based learning strategies that you yourself or you would use or you would advise other teachers to use.
So for myself, that's where I've said, I think choice is very important for kids. So for me, most of the things that my kids are doing, I teach game design and development. So in my case, a lot of it's about using different tools to create their own content or their own games. I like to, in my case, it's my main learning outcome for my kids is the iterative design process. So I want them all to understand that. What tool they use to get there doesn't matter so much. If they use Game Maker or Fortnite Creative Mode or Unreal Engine or Minecraft, those are all different tools. They're still going to go through this same process. So my focus is on teaching that process and then, letting the kids choose a little more of their path, including, in my case, what the theme of their game is going to be, what the storyline is. They write a design document, and then they go through the whole process. And they even end up learning the tool often on their own or aspects of it, because I'm putting the learning in their hands. I'm saying you can use something we're all very familiar with, like let's say Minecraft, or you can, really challenge yourself maybe and get into Unreal Engine and know that you're using a professional industry game design tool. So that's one of the ways in my class. But then I think of other teachers, and I think again of the idea that the easiest point of entry, I think, is, and I think I kind of touched on it before, is allowing kids to have that opportunity to choose, a project that is meaningful and relevant to them. And a game perhaps could help them with that. And again, this is still staying in that realm sort of the content creation like Minecraft and such. But if a kid can create their, meet the learning outcomes using Minecraft Fortnite Creative, etc., and still, kind of tell the story that they're supposed to for their project, I think that's an easy way for teachers, because they don't have to necessarily be the expert in the tool. So that's one thing. Then you have some teachers that are just phenomenal and create experiences that are, bring more of a game element. One of the science teachers in my building, his name's Chris Swanson. I love what he does because he's always willing to try something new. And he created a CSI, like a forensic type activity for one of his science lessons. So it's a lab like the kids would do normally, but now they're the detective or what have you, trying to explore, crack the case. Yeah. So again, he's probably, I mean, it takes effort, but lesson planning takes time and effort no matter what the case is. So if you can do something like that, that's great. Another really wonderful point of entry is the idea of, breakout rooms have become so popular. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Breakout EDU, but, Adam Bello is the CEO of Breakout EDU, and they have a wonderful product and a wonderful community. So what they have is it's like a box that instead of breaking out of a room, you actually have to break into the box. So there might be like 6 locks on the box, and you have to find the different codes to get in. So here we are, we're creating a game. It could be directly tied to the content. They have a tremendous resource library of games others have created. They have templates for how you can create your own, which allows any teacher to now become a game designer in their content area. And again, if I'm learning about slavery, wouldn't it be much more interesting to be, have this little bit of a mystery element, try to figure out things and be uncovering the content, and then also having this fun and engaging experience of, trying to beat this game, but really at the same time learning all of the content. So I think that's a really wonderful point of entry that's very reasonable. But there's so many. And then when you take, going back to things like Minecraft and Fortnite, there are like libraries of lesson plans for both of those that other educators have created and are part of a repository of lesson plans that, like I created one for Fortnite Creative on creating Rube Goldberg machines. So there it is. It's a science activity teaching simple machines and automation and engineering principles. And a teacher could, just basically grab that lesson plan and be ready to go without too much preparation on their side. So I think that's where we could use the resource of other people, which is wonderful. And educators that are passionate about game-based learning happen to be extremely generous and want to bring others into that world and share what they do. So there's a lot there that they can benefit from.
Yeah, awesome. Really getting a sense of the really impressive breadth of this world and of the different types of approaches and games and various different avenues to take with game-based learning. And you touched on something there that I want to kind of zero in a little closer. And you mentioned using other teachers as a resource, and I wanted to focus in on that idea of resources even more strongly, because obviously they're hugely important to education in general. Obviously it goes without saying, but particularly with game-based learning, it seems that having the right resources for the particular approach is so important, and be they offline or online. And, obviously for us here at Atomi, online resources is what we're all about. So particularly an area of interest for us. And I guess I just wanted to hear from you a little bit about the importance of resources to game-based learning, and also the importance of the right resources and how to recognize that something is the right resource for a particular class, and also when it's not.
Tremendously important. I think there's a lot of bad approaches to game-based learning out there. And there's an expression that used to be thrown around a lot more often called chocolate-covered broccoli, which referred to games that were specifically made for education, and kids see right through them. So kids could smell a learning game from a mile away. So it's really crucial that we're using high impact games that that kids are interested in playing. So it's it's why I think commercial games have been so successful in this area. And again, I'll mention, titles like Fortnite Creative and Minecraft, both hugely popular, and now and kids already are familiar with, so why not bring them, allow them to now use and leverage that. But and then there are some games like Eco, which is made by Strange Loop Games, which is a AAA title type of game, like it's developed like a AAA title would be, and it does have a definite education. The education is deeply embedded and intentional, but also the game is designed to be the kind of game kids would want to buy and play. So we do have a lot with that, and then you have experiences like, like you have like Kahoot or Jeopardy that you might play in PowerPoint, and those could be great for reviewing content, but I just be careful about teachers, overstating that they're using game-based learning if that's what they're implying by the way they're using it. So it's just important to understand that we're talking about true impact of true games in this environment. So when I say the resources and people especially, I have, thank goodness for social media and Twitter, I have made created the most amazing network of people that are passionate about game-based learning. And those are the people I want to be around all the time. I mean, we share interests in and outside of education because of that passion. And those people are so available and accessible to others. I am always available to chat to other educators interested in bringing games into the classroom. So I think it's really important to surround yourself with the people that are interested in this. We've also made all the mistakes, so you don't have to, So there's a lot of value in people as a resource, communities as a resource. Participate.com and Facebook both have a very rich game-based learning community. And there are all sorts of other ways to find those people, but for me, Twitter's been awesome. And then that same idea of that community is, again, like I had said before, there are tons of resources and lesson plans available for these tools that I've been talking about. Like if you search on the Minecraft education site for lessons on third grade math that follow Common Core and fractions, you're going to find lessons that make it easier for you to dive into that. And then, of course, feel free to modify the lesson to hone in more on the skills you're trying to teach your kids. But the fact that somebody else did this and made this available, including the world, is pretty great. Epic Games with Fortnite and Unreal Engine and Twinmotion have, like I said, created a lesson plan library that's available and that's growing and growing to create more of these opportunities. I think it's great for a teacher that, wants to get into it, but it provides that guidance that they might need, especially, early on.
Yeah, fantastic. Really, a whole lot of resources available there, both in terms of what's online, what tools to use, and also, as you were keen to stress, and rightly so, in terms of the people that and the existing communities that you can turn to provide that guidance, which I suppose is particularly important at a time like this, and which ties me into, I guess, the last main area I wanted to tackle with you, which is sort of an inescapable part of, well, not just every conversation around education, I guess every conversation anybody's having at the moment, right? Which is the idea of the pandemic,
yes,
that we're all currently living through, which has affected every walk of life. Of course, education and schools and classrooms being very much a big part of that. And under our main topic of game-based learning, I just wanted to get a sense from you of how would you say that game-based learning in your classrooms and classrooms around the world has been affected by the pandemic and the move to virtual classrooms or reduced class sizes? Has it been a harmful effect? Has it been a positive effect in some respects? And what has the response been? And how should teachers respond to any challenges that arise?
So, for one thing, I think many teachers turned to games in this time for a variety of reasons. One is that some companies like, Minecraft made Education Edition free to use at the end of last school year while people were stuck were learning from home. So it made it more accessible and there were activities that were happening. A group of us actually created a series of Minecraft build challenges around even COVID-19 and actually themes relevant. Like we had a COVID-19 Minecraft challenges, which included a build your quarantine dream home. One was build a model of the coronavirus and label it. One was called Inform the Public, which participants created either a museum or a library that was narrated and had users that went through it learning about the pandemic and timelines and such, and non-player characters were giving the dialogue and sending people engaged in the activity to outside resources and interesting things like that. And then we had a few others along that line. We did a number of others, like we did something called the Minecraft Masters, and these were all global, because one of the unique opportunities that we had with the pandemic was that all of a sudden, it became more, there was more potential to provide, activities that reached a global audience rather than only focusing on our small classrooms. So I think people took to that as an opportunity. So we saw a lot of that. So I think it opened up a lot of interesting things. And we had, for a lot of these challenges, the results were submitted through, the builds were submitted through videos in Flipgrid, so it was easy to share the work other students were doing and all of that. And so a lot of teachers that were looking for a way to engage their kids, provide connections for their kids where that was a challenge, turned to things like that. And also like to use as an example, and I brought up a couple times Fortnite creative mode. One of the neat things there is that some schools have challenges maybe with their network and accessing certain games. Now all of a sudden we're at home and a kid who's on their Xbox can collaborate with a kid on their Nintendo Switch and a kid on their computer, and they all have their own accounts and it's free. So there were ways for people to get involved together, and create something interesting almost without some of the barriers that we might even have in the school building. So I think a lot of educators saw that and embraced that for those titles in particular, and also others that became almost like a social thing, like Among Us, which maybe you've played. If not, you need to. Is a social deduction game. Oh gosh, you got to play it. So it's a social deduction game for up to 10 players, and the idea is that there's 1 or 2 or 3 imposters, and the rest of the people are crew members, and you're trying to figure out who the imposters are.
Oh, I have played this.
Of course you have.
Sorry, as soon as you started describing, I was like, yeah.
Yeah, I played that.
It's fun. It's fun.
It's very fun, and it's a neat way. It's very easy to jump into a game. The game actually, I think, increased in popularity tremendously because of the pandemic, because it had been around for a few years and not gotten much notice. All of a sudden, we're in this situation where we're dying for opportunities to interact, and games provide that. But this game in particular made it easy because you could play for free on your phone. A lot of influencers were playing on YouTube and Twitch, and then every kid plays it. So to play, whether it be an icebreaker for class to build community, or whether it be an actual language arts like lesson to talk about argumentation and such, that's been starting to be used. But again, I think it's one of those that because of the pandemic, people saw the ease of use and the value. And I will say esports, let's talk about esports too, like during this time. Again, it's like we've all of a sudden lost, or at least even now it's a challenge, but the second half of last year, we lost all after school activities, but then we have an activity like esports or, a gaming club that actually can meet and continue remotely and give kids the opportunity to come together, to compete together, to collaborate, to do all the other academic things that actually revolve around the potential of esports. So I think games filled an important void during that time that luckily people did honor and embrace. So I think it was actually, really, really, that was one of the positives that we've seen.
Yeah, which is great, and obviously it goes without saying that it's so much hardship and difficulty for so many people, and their way of life affected in so many ways. But I suppose if there is a silver lining to be found, it does sound as if in the area of game-based learning, it is something which has flourished and provided something to people which they might not otherwise, to students, right, which they might not otherwise have got, which is, of course, fantastic to hear. And I'm sure you could, tell us about more and more games for hours and hours. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for in our main conversation. However, before I let you go, we always like to finish by getting our guests' hot tip for the day. Now, this can be a little piece of advice for some teachers out there. It can be a little anecdote from your teaching days yourself. It can be deadly serious. It can be completely lighthearted. Totally up to you. But to close us out, Steve, what is your hot tip for us?
So I think my hot tip, and it still relates very much to our conversation, is creating affinity spaces for kids. Like, and in my case, games have been the avenue for that. So a little bit of a warm-hearted kind of, I think, story is, in my game club, it's been a space that kids that otherwise don't often have like this homeschool connection, maybe go home to not a very active social life or whatnot. Kids in that game club all are there, and interacting with each other. All of a sudden they found their space, their people. And the thing that's really made that abundantly clear to me is that I've started to get like emails from parents that would say, we noticed that, our son loves or our daughter loves game club. They don't have that many connections outside of school. Can you tell me who they're hanging out with in game club so we can facilitate these relationships, because we're trying to build their social, network. And when I see that and see that the parents are, because you don't really know always what the kids are going home to. You just see them in school. And when you can see them actually interacting with other kids and know that they can and are doing that, and then hear that they might not be doing that, but maybe we can help with that. I've seen that from that experience. This year, I think I touched on this. I might have touched on this one kid before. I forget if I mentioned him, but he's struggling in a lot of his classes right now. But he's doing tremendous work in my class, and the counselors and other people have even said, can we figure out a way, like he's sort of withdrawing and in other areas, can we leverage this interest of his, to have him be more communicative and more social and things like that, and can we so in other words, they're seeing that this is the area that he, this is where he lives, his niche, and how can we further empower him in other ways in his life through embracing that. So in other words, again, the parents and the counselors aren't saying he's spending too much time playing games. They're saying this is something he's passionate about, interested in, obviously has an aptitude for. How can we further, utilize that? So I can't say enough about, I'll use the term again, affinity spaces, like finding these spaces that are where kids are in their element and, really encouraging that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really great anecdote to illustrate the point, and a great piece of advice for teachers to help children find these affinity spaces. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, and thank you so much for coming on, for talking to us, for walking us through the world of game-based learning. It's been great to have you.
And great to talk to you, Simon. Thank you.
Fantastic. To everybody listening, I would say if you want to listen to any other episodes, you can find them on whatever platform you're listening to this on. You can find us at our main site at getatomy.com. For the time being, it's going to be goodbye from Steve.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me. See ya.